She is in agony. Something is being driven into her chest again and again, and drawn back out each time. And each time it is drawn out, she feels as though a piece of her comes with it. She is moaning aloud from the pain. And yet, what she says about this moment, what she chooses to write down in her own hand years later, is the part almost no one expects. Avila, Spain, 1559. Teresa has been a nun for more than 20 years. And for most of them, her body has been trying to kill her. At 23, she collapsed into a coma so deep that everyone around her was certain she had died. Wax was pressed into her eyelids. A grave was dug in the convent yard. The Carmelite friars gathered outside the city and sang the Requiem Mass for her soul. Her own father was the only one who refused to believe it, insisting he could still see a flicker of life in her. And so, by his stubbornness alone, she was not buried alive. 4 days later, she woke. Her tongue was bitten to pieces. Her body had drawn it into itself like a fist. For 8 months afterwards, she could not bear to be touched. For 3 years after that, she could not move at all. Not her legs, not her arms, not so much as a single finger. She would carry the aftershocks of that illness, the fevers, the fainting, the failing heart, for the rest of her life. The body had betrayed her. The soul offered no better company. For nearly 15 years she would kneel in prayer and feel nothing on the other side of it. No presence, no comfort, no voice. The very thing she had entered the convent to find seemed to have quietly packed up and left. And now the people around her are turning too. Teresa has begun speaking about reform, about tearing the comfort out of the convent life and replacing it with something stricter, poorer, harder to live. Her sisters do not thank her for it. Her superiors grow cold. Worse still, word is spreading that this woman falls into strange trances, hears voices, and sees visions no one else can confirm. In an age when false mystics were feared and the Spanish Inquisition watched such claims with increasing suspicion, even her own confessors begin to wonder whether she has been deceived. She cannot even speak about what is happening to her without fear that the very men guiding her soul may decide that whatever is speaking to her is not Christ at all. She is a woman with a ruined body, a silent soul, and a church that is beginning to wonder whether something inside her has gone quietly, dangerously wrong. One day in prayer, an angel appears beside her. Not a large one, small, she says, and strikingly beautiful. His face so bright it seems to burn. One of the highest of the angels, the kind that appear to be made entirely of fire. In his hand is a long spear of gold, and at its point, a little flame. He drives it into her heart. Again and again, she says, he plunges it in deep enough that she feels it reach her very core. And each time he draws it back out, it feels as though he is pulling part of her out along with it. The pain she will write is so great that it makes her moan aloud. And yet, she will also write that the sweetness of this pain so far surpassed the suffering of it that she did not wish it to end, that her soul would be satisfied with nothing less than God Himself, that during the days it lasted she wanted to see no one and speak to no one. She wanted only to guard that wound, because it was worth more to her than every created thing combined. Not only did she endure it, she begged that it would remain. At first, her words can sound almost impossible to understand. Was Teresa saying that suffering is somehow good, that Christians should seek pain? No. No one had spent longer praying for relief from illness than Teresa herself. She was not in love with suffering. She believed she had encountered something else entirely. The love of God had become so immediate, so overwhelming that ordinary language could no longer describe it. She reached inside for the strongest images she knew: fire, a spear, a wound. The wound did not become beautiful because it was painful. It became beautiful because for one unbearable moment, she believed nothing remained between her soul and God. The reward was never the pain, the reward was God Himself. The pain was simply the way that overwhelming love was expressed by a soul still too small to contain it. She calls it a caressing of love. not despite the wound, within it. This is the transverberation, one of the most examined mystical experiences in the history of the Church. Carved into marble by Bernini, painted again and again for centuries, and studied by theologians who wanted to understand what precisely had happened to this woman in that room. Teresa never claimed this was the goal of the Christian life. She warned her own sisters against chasing visions or envying her ecstasies. Mystical experiences were gifts God gave to some, but they were never the measure of holiness. The goal was not ecstasy. The goal was union with God, a union that begins not with human achievement, but with the gift of God's grace, freely offered and freely received. She believed Christ himself had already taught this. He had never promised his followers a life without suffering. He had promised them himself. He had spoken of losing one's life in order to find it, and of the kingdom of God already at work within those who belong to him. Teresa did not think she had discovered a new teaching. She believed she had simply been allowed, for one astonishing moment, to experience what those words meant from the inside. Years later, still crossing brutal roads across Spain in failing health, still founding convents against the resistance that never fully disappeared, Teresa sat down to write The Interior Castle. She described the soul as a castle of dazzling beauty, its many mansions describing the soul's gradual response to God's grace, leading ever more deeply into union with Christ, who already dwells within the soul by his grace, not as one who had finally arrived, but as one who had been drawing it ever more deeply into communion with himself all along. The extraordinary wound had passed. The invitation remained. Every Christian, she believed, was invited into that same deeper union, not through visions or human achievement, but by opening ever more fully to the grace God freely gives through prayer, humility, obedience, and love. Her body never stopped failing her. Her opponents never fully disappeared. The roads across Spain never grew any easier. But she had found in the midst of all of it exactly what she had spent her whole life searching for. Not comfort, not relief, not even extraordinary experiences, but God himself, close enough to transform even a wound into a language of love. In 1622, she was canonized. In 1970, nearly 400 years after her death, the Church named her the first woman doctor of the Church. Not because she had experienced visions, but because she had given the Church a language for the deepest journey of the soul. She entered the convent a sick young woman searching for God. She left behind a map for entering ever more deeply into union with him. And perhaps the greatest paradox of her life was this: the woman whose body had once lain beside an open grave would one day spend the rest of her life trying to describe a love so profound that the closest word she could find for it was a wound. Not because God's love injures the soul, but because when infinite love draws a finite creature into deeper union with himself, even human language begins to fail.